Israeli occupation forces target several villages in southern Lebanon, killing 15 civilians. The Israeli Prime Minister urges the UN to withdraw its peacekeeping forces from southern Lebanon. And Israel continues its siege of Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza for the 8th consecutive day. Hello, good afternoon. It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time and you're watching Q News. We're going to start with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين. وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Once again, smoke has been seen rising over Beirut as Israel continued to launch airstrikes across multiple areas in southern and eastern Lebanon. Earlier, a top UN official expressed concern during a visit to the city that Lebanon's ports and airports might be rendered inoperable, which could severely impact food supplies entering the country. Lebanese media have reported that Israeli occupation forces have targeted several villages in southern Lebanon. Additionally, Israel launched an airstrike on a residential building in the town of Bakosta, east of Sidon, and targeted the Nabatea market in southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry has confirmed 15 victims in 3 Israeli airstrikes on various towns in the country. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has urged the UN to withdraw its peacekeeping forces from southern Lebanon, citing concerns that their presence endangers both UNIFIL personnel and Israeli soldiers. In a message to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Netanyahu warned that failing to withdraw UNIFIL forces would leave them vulnerable to Hezbollah, endangering both their lives and those of Israeli soldiers. He stressed the need to remove UNIFIL troops from combat zones. Hezbollah rocket barrages have triggered sirens across northern Israel overnight and into the early morning. Sirens and explosions were heard in Haifa and the town of Kiryat Shimona. An Israeli occupation army spokesperson stated that 5 projectiles were identified crossing from Lebanon into Israeli territory and were intercepted by the Israeli defense system. Hezbollah announced that it targeted a gathering of Israeli occupation forces at the Zibdin barracks in the occupied Sheba farms with a rocket barrage. Hezbollah also attacked Israeli forces at Keren Naftali and carried out a drone strike on the Marjayun district and the air defense base in Kiryat Eliza, west of Haifa. Additionally, the group launched a rocket barrage targeting Israeli troops in the Metula settlement and the other forces at Kelet Wada, Zayrat barracks and the Shomira settlement. Iraq's foreign minister has called for a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon and stressed the need to preserve civilian lives. This came at a press conference in Baghdad with his Iranian counterpart, where the Iraqi foreign minister confirmed his country's refusal to exploit Iraqi airspace as part of the war. He also warned against the expansion of the conflict and noted that Israel's aggression against Lebanon would lead to another war in the region and threaten security and stability. For his part, the Iranian foreign minister said that his country was not seeking to expand the escalation, but he stressed that Iran was fully prepared for the state of war. Hezbollah has clashed with Israeli forces in southern Lebanon, escalating tensions with airstrikes, drone attacks and evacuations. US concerns grow over Israel's targeting of UN peacekeepers. Here's our special report.
Hezbollah reported that its fighters engaged in direct combat with Israeli occupation forces, attempting to infiltrate the southern Lebanese town of Ramiyah, resulting in casualties among Israeli troops. Israeli media confirmed the confrontation, citing a military spokesperson who detailed clashes between Hezbollah fighters and Israeli occupation forces, specifically mentioning the 8th Brigade and the Elite 707 Lothar unit. The spokesperson claimed that the Israeli occupation forces responded with airstrikes, killing several Hezbollah members. Sirens blared in northern Israel, signaling escalated hostilities in Upper and Western Galilee. In the midst of these developments, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin expressed concern over Israel's continued attacks on UNIFIL positions, urging his Israeli counterpart Yoav Gallant to prioritize the safety of international peacekeeping forces and the Lebanese military. Israel's repeated strikes on peacekeepers raised serious questions about its disregard of international protocols. Hezbollah also launched drone strikes targeting the outskirts of Tel Aviv, as Israel responded by imposing closures around several northern towns. In a further act of aggression, Israeli occupation forces ordered the evacuation of residents from 23 villages in southern Lebanon, displacing more civilians and extending the zone of conflict from the Bekaa Valley to the Mediterranean. Intensified Israeli attacks have led to the displacement of nearly 1.2 million Lebanese, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis in the region as Israel's offensive continues to fuel hostilities and unrest.
Now, for more on this, we cross over to our newsroom with Hani. Hani.
Thank you, Mark. And for further analysis on the current situation in Lebanon, we're joined from Beirut by Dr. Najat Aoun Saliba, a member of the Lebanese House of Representatives. Welcome, Dr. Saliba. Now, first off, what do you think about Netanyahu's statements regarding the need to withdraw UNIFIL forces from Lebanon? Do you think they're indicative of the potential future targeting?
Yes, I think this statement is very dangerous because it really puts all the international agreements and UN resolutions into questions, or it just shows how much Netanyahu has a disregard to all international treaties and agreements. This is something that no one can accept, and no country or no person fighting for any human right can accept that we don't honor the UN Resolution Council's decisions and also the international agreements. So yes, we're entering into a phase that is extremely, extremely dangerous.
Well, is there a way for the international law to safeguard UNIFIL forces in southern Lebanon?
The UNIFIL is present in southern Lebanon based on an agreement with many, many countries. And actually, the representatives of the people on the ground from the UNIFIL are from many, many different countries. So to just enter the Lebanese border and decide on the whereabouts of the UNIFIL shows how much Netanyahu is actually not respecting any decision or any of the countries that have soldiers on the borders of Lebanon.
But can the international law form some sort of protection for the UNIFIL forces in southern Lebanon?
National law? No, this is an international treaty that is protected by all the countries that have agreed to come into Lebanon to actually make sure that the UN Resolution 1701 is implemented. We honor all the soldiers that are on our soil, and we also are grateful for all the countries that have contributed to spread peace along our border.
Dr. Saliba, now, what steps can the Lebanese parliament take to resolve the presidential vacancy crisis?
There have been many calls and many voices, loud and clear, calling for all parties to come to the parliament as per the constitution and elect a president. A lot of people now are putting all their personal gain and their political gain aside and calling for this to happen now, because we really need a president to stand on equal distances with all our citizens so that it can negotiate on behalf of the country. However, we see still some political parties that are that have boycotted, or they have been really regressing or stopping this fact to go forward, that they are continuing to go into the nitty-gritty details of putting names and stopping this election to happen. So we call on all the parties, even the parties that are still bickering about their own personal gain through the election of the president, to put this small gain aside, considering the danger and the risk of the country, and also the risk of all the citizens who are fleeing their countries and fending for themselves, either on the streets or in the shelters around Beirut area and around all the other villages in the country.
Dr. Saliba, how do you evaluate and what are your thoughts on the efforts by the American administration and France to hold the war in Lebanon?
We understand that a lot of efforts have been put by the international community for the Lebanese people to actually implement the UN Resolution 1701 and also form a strong state that is able to protect its border and work on reinstating the institutions and stopping corruption. However, we have to admit that a lot of those conventional parties have been really delaying all of these measures that needed to be taken. They have not assumed all the responsibilities highly, and as such, they have lost the trust of the international community. And that's why we see that a lot of countries, foreign countries, are really not back in Lebanon or raising the alarm about the massacres and the atrocity of the strikes that we are receiving on our lands on a daily basis. Yes, there is an internal responsibility that we did not take seriously, and I think we are all paying the price of some elites who decided not to listen to the international community and go on with their own personal gains.
One final question now, Dr. Saliba. How do you view the Security Council's stance regarding the ongoing conflict in Lebanon?
I think we as Lebanese, we call for a strong state, so that we also call on the security, on the council to continue putting all the efforts to stopping all the massacres and all the violations of human rights, whether it is in Lebanon or in Gaza. This is extremely important. I think the whole world should continue to back up the Security Council, the UN Security Council, and all international resolutions so that we can live together in peace. Otherwise, I think it's going to be very chaotic. And if every country is left to do what Israel is doing to our country, I think we will be calling on no human rights in the future in this world.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Najat Aoun Saliba, a member of the Lebanese House of Representatives. Thank you very much, Dr. Saliba, for your valuable insights. Now I'll hand you back over to Mark. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Hani. Fascinating discussion. Now, Hezbollah has launched a guided missile attack on an Israeli occupation force attempting a ground infiltration in the southern Lebanese town of Ramia. Over the past hours, Hezbollah conducted 27 operations, ranging from repelling Israeli incursion attempts to targeting Israeli military positions. Hezbollah also targeted Israeli sites in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights for the first time. Israeli media have reported explosions in Akri and Nahariya in the northern Israel following the latest rocket barrage from southern Lebanon. The Israeli occupation army has confirmed that Hezbollah launched approximately 320 projectiles on various parts of Israel, resulting in 3 injuries in western Galilee and 12 others with minor injuries in other locations. Saudi Arabia has officially launched a relief air bridge to Lebanon in response to ongoing Israeli attacks. The first plane, carrying food, medical supplies and humanitarian aid, has departed from Riyadh to Beirut. A relief team is also accompanying the mission to support rescue operations. Director of the UN High Commission for Refugees, Mohammed al-Nasr, has stated that Israeli forces are deliberately targeting densely populated areas in Beirut. He added that the humanitarian situation in Lebanon is worsening as displaced families are forced to live in the streets without shelter, while many Lebanese hospitals are out of service. The Lebanese government has suspended the current school year amid relentless Israeli attacks that have claimed over 2,000 lives and displaced more than 1.2 million people. Hundreds of thousands have sought refuge in schools across the country, with many staying for nearly 2 months. Lebanon has 904,000 students enrolled in primary and secondary education and a teaching workforce of more than 800,000, with 55% employed in the private sector. In 2022, there were almost 36,000 teachers in primary education. In an Israeli airstrike on a home in the southern town of Sabine. The Red Cross confirmed that its ambulances were targeted despite receiving clearance from UNIFIL to move toward a Lebanese army checkpoint that had been attacked by Israeli forces. The Lebanese news agency reported that civilians were also injured in an Israeli strike on a building in the Buxter Shahabil area near Sidon. Additionally, Israeli aircraft targeted a vehicle in the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon. Rescue operations continue in central Beirut as teams search for survivors trapped beneath the rubble after Israel's deadliest airstrikes on the city. The narrow roads in the area are complicating efforts to clear the debris and reach those still buried. While Israel claims its strikes target Hezbollah, civilians remain the primary victims. And as Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Beirut's southern suburbs, volunteers from a Lebanese animal rescue organization are risking their lives to save animals trapped beneath the rubble. Riding motorbikes through damaged streets where cars cannot pass, the volunteers of the Animals Lebanon organization navigate through the streets to rescue terrified kittens, bringing them to safety. Their efforts have led to the rescue of over 150 cats, many now sheltered at the organization's office. Now we move to the latest developments in Gaza. So to Gaza. Israeli occupation forces have committed 4 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the last 24 hours, leaving 52 Palestinians killed and the injury of 128 others. Local health authorities reported that the Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October the 7th has exceeded 42,200, with more than 98,400 individuals injured. The Israeli occupation army has continued siege of the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza for the 8th consecutive day. Israeli forces have been demolishing Palestinian homes using explosive-laden robots, while fires have erupted in several areas of the camp due to repeated are blocking emergency teams from retrieving over 75 bodies in Jabalia and northern Gaza. Eleven Palestinians from a single family were killed in an Israeli airstrike on several homes in the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. Palestinian sources reported that others were also injured due to the Israeli bombardment of residential and civilian buildings in the camp. Israeli media has reported that no decision has been made yet on launching a ground offensive in northern Gaza. However, operations there aim to pressure residents into fleeing the area. Israeli reports suggest that the military actions in northern Gaza may serve as a precursor to a political plan aimed at imposing a siege, starvation and forced evacuation of the region's residents. The media reported that these operations could be part of the so-called General's Plan, under which northern Gaza would be cleared of its inhabitants. In a separate development, Gaza's civil defense has announced the retrieval of the bodies of 3 victims and the evacuation of 7 civilians trapped in their homes in Al Fallujah communications area in northern Gaza. Meanwhile, 5 others were killed in artillery shelling on the northern outskirts of Al Burej refugee camp in central Gaza. Well, that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's a recap of the headlines. Israeli occupation forces target several villages in southern Lebanon, killing 15 civilians. The Israeli Prime Minister urges the UN to withdraw its peacekeeping forces from southern Lebanon. And Israel continues its siege of the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza for the 8th consecutive day. Well, that's all for the news bulletin for this hour. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for Rihem with In Depth shortly. Thanks for watching.